Long before history learned how to write, someone learned how to build. Not small shelters, not simple tools, but structures so vast and so precise that even today we struggle to explain how they were made. Stone was cut, lifted, and placed with an accuracy that suggests planning, measurement, and intention. Massive weights were moved without machines. Perfect angles were achieved without metal, and knowledge was applied that seems to appear fully formed without trial or error. What we see today are only the remains. The knowledge itself is gone. No manuals, no records, only silent monuments left behind to challenge everything we think we know about the past. This story is not about myths or speculation. It is about physical evidence that still stands in plain sight, asking the same question again and again. Were ancient people far more advanced than we've been taught? If you enjoy thoughtful documentaries that explore the hidden depths of human history, consider supporting the channel by liking the video and subscribing. Your support helps keep these investigations alive. Now, let's explore what the stones still remember.
Mesa Verde, tucked into the high desert plateau of the American Southwest, where piñón and juniper cling to mesa tops and sandstone cliffs fracture into alcoves shaped by wind and water, Mesa Verde reveals itself gradually, its most striking structures concealed beneath overhangs rather than announced upon the horizon. From above, the landscape appears quiet and sparsely marked, yet approached from within the canyons, entire villages emerge from the stone itself, their walls rising naturally from the cliff faces as though the rock had been persuaded to organize itself into human form. These cliff dwellings, built primarily in the late 13th century by the ancestral Pueblo people, represent the final and most visually arresting phase of a long cultural sequence that unfolded over centuries, marked by gradual shifts in settlement, subsistence, and social organization rather than abrupt innovation. Long before the alcoves were filled with masonry towers and multi-room complexes, communities lived atop the mesas in pit houses and surface pueblos, cultivating maize, beans, and squash, adapting carefully to a challenging environment defined by variable rainfall and thin soils. The decision to move into the cliffs was neither sudden nor universal, but when it occurred, it was executed with remarkable coherence, producing settlements such as Cliff Palace, Spruce Tree House, and Balcony House, each carefully fitted to its alcove, balancing protection, access, and sunlight. Sandstone blocks were shaped with stone tools, laid in courses with mud mortar, and often finished with plaster. Their proportions and bonding patterns are consistent enough to suggest shared standards rather than individual improvisation. Timber beams harvested from distant uplands were hauled into the canyons and set into walls and ceilings. Dendrochronology shows that many structures were built within narrow time windows, implying coordinated building efforts across entire communities. Water seeping within the alcoves provided reliable sources even during dry periods. Overhangs offered shelter from precipitation and temperature extremes, integrating environmental knowledge directly into architectural choice. Kivas, circular, semi-subterranean ceremonial spaces, are woven into these complexes, anchoring domestic life to ritual practice and reinforcing the sense that social and spiritual systems were inseparable. Access routes were often intentionally limited, involving ladders or hand and toe holds carved into rock, suggesting concerns with security or privacy. Yet the settlements were not hidden defensively. They were visible to those who knew where to look, part of a landscape already deeply familiar to its inhabitants. What remains most striking is how fully realized these communities appear, despite being occupied for only a few generations before abandonment.
There is little evidence of architectural experimentation or transition within the cliff dwellings themselves. Instead, they appear as the confident expression of techniques refined earlier on mesa tops and in open valleys, now applied in a new setting.
The abandonment of Mesa Verde around the end of the 13th century has long been a focal point of interpretation. Once framed as sudden collapse driven by drought, conflict, or resource exhaustion. Tree ring data confirm periods of severe drought, and signs of nutritional stress and occasional violence appear in the archaeological record. Yet these factors alone do not account for the organized nature of departure. There is no widespread evidence of destruction or chaos. Instead, structures were left largely intact, tools and possessions selectively removed, suggesting planned migration rather than flight. Oral traditions among modern Pueblo peoples speak of journeys, obligations, and the need to move when conditions changed, emphasizing continuity rather than disappearance. Mesa Verde thus represents not an endpoint, but a chapter, one in which accumulated knowledge about farming, building, and social coordination was carried elsewhere, leaving behind a remarkably complete material snapshot of a society in motion. The idea of a lost civilization attaches here because the stone villages feel frozen in time, their occupants absent yet strongly implied, their lives legible but unreachable. Unlike monumental centers built to endure as symbols of power, Mesa Verde's architecture was practical, communal, and scaled closely to daily life, making its preservation feel unusually intimate. There are no inscriptions to explain motives, no named rulers or dated proclamations, only patterns of use and construction that must be read indirectly. This absence does not indicate simplicity. On the contrary, the successful occupation of such a marginal environment required detailed ecological knowledge, seasonal planning, and social cooperation finely tuned to place. The cliff dwellings compress these systems into a brief, intense architectural phase, giving the impression of sudden brilliance, yet they are better understood as the visible crest of a much longer wave of adaptation, now largely invisible. Earlier pit houses, field systems, roads, and water control features across the region hint at this depth, but erosion and reuse have erased much of the connective tissue, isolating Mesa Verde visually from its antecedents. In this isolation, the sites take on an aura of mystery disproportionate to their actual historical position, encouraging interpretations that emphasize disappearance rather than transformation. The notion of a lost civilization here does not require unknown origins or forgotten technologies, but emerges from the gap between what endures and what moved on. When the people left Mesa Verde, they did not vanish. They reorganized, forming new communities along rivers and mesas to the south and east, carrying traditions that continue in altered form today. What was lost was not the culture itself, but the specific alignment of population, climate, and place that made cliff dwelling both practical and meaningful. Standing beneath an alcove, looking up at walls that still hold the imprint of hands and decisions made centuries ago, one senses that the completeness of the architecture masks an absence that cannot be filled by excavation alone. Mesa Verde does not challenge archaeological understanding, it deepens it, demonstrating how quickly even well-adapted systems can relocate, leaving behind material clarity but cultural silence. The villages remain carefully built and abruptly quiet, offering no explanation for their stillness, only the suggestion that human histories are often preserved at moments of pause rather than continuity. In that pause, Mesa Verde occupies a space between presence and departure, reminding us that civilizations are not always lost through catastrophe or forgetting, but sometimes through successful movement onward, leaving stone behind as a precise, unintentional record of knowledge that once lived elsewhere, carrying forward, while its most visible expression remained where it was, waiting. On the small Mediterranean island of Malta, archaeologists are confronted with an engineering mystery that predates both the Egyptian pyramids and Stonehenge by more than a millennium. Scattered across the island are a series of uniquely shaped megalithic temples, such as Hajar Kim and Menidra, constructed in clover-like layouts using limestone blocks that can weigh over 50 tons each. These monuments are not the product of a sprawling empire or an advanced metal-using civilization, but of a Neolithic society that existed in near total isolation. Inside these temples, researchers uncovered the famous so-called Fat Lady statues, rounded, faceless human figures that emphasize fertility, embodiment, and the rhythms of nature rather than individual identity. While these sculptures offer insight into belief systems, the most compelling evidence of Malta's advanced ancient knowledge lies not on the surface, but underground, within the Hal Saflieni hypogeum. Carved more than 11 meters beneath the surface, the hypogeum is a three-level subterranean complex excavated entirely from solid limestone. Its precision, symmetry, and architectural sophistication strongly suggest it was never intended to be a simple burial chamber. Instead, it appears to have served as a multifunctional ceremonial and ritual center designed with extraordinary intentionality. The modern discovery of the hypogeum was accidental. In 1902, construction workers digging a cistern in the town of Paola broke through the roof of a hidden chamber. Beneath the surface lay an extensive underground complex that had remained sealed for thousands of years. Subsequent excavations revealed that the site was first carved around 4000 to 3600 BC, placing it among the oldest known subterranean architectural achievements in the world. What makes the hypogeum exceptional is that its builders did not simply hollow out caves. They carefully replicated surface temple architecture underground, carving imitation beams, curved ceilings, false doorways, and symmetrical chambers directly into the bedrock. This level of architectural abstraction implies not only technical skill, but conceptual planning on a scale rarely attributed to Neolithic farming communities. Mainstream archaeology places the beginning of Malta's temple period around 3600 BC, yet the technological leap remains puzzling. The archaeological record shows small farming communities inhabiting the island around 5000 BC using simple stone and flint tools. Then, with no clearly documented transitional phase, the Maltese temple builders began quarrying, transporting, and erecting limestone blocks weighing tens of tons. Moving a 57-ton limestone slab across Malta's uneven and rocky terrain would require a refined understanding of friction, leverage, and load distribution. However, the tools recovered from this era consist mainly of flint scrapers, stone hammers, and spherical stone rollers. The disparity between the simplicity of these tools and the scale of the construction represents one of the greatest unresolved questions in Neolithic archaeology. The Hal Saflieni hypogeum provides the strongest evidence that this society possessed a form of intentional acoustic engineering. One chamber in particular, commonly known as the oracle room, contains a small, carefully carved niche that functions as a resonator. When a low-frequency sound is produced inside this niche, vibrations propagate throughout the entire underground complex. Acoustic testing conducted by researchers has shown that the hypogeum resonates most strongly at approximately 110 Hz. This frequency is not arbitrary. Modern neurological studies indicate that low-frequency sound around this range can influence brain activity, promoting altered or meditative states. While these effects should be interpreted cautiously, the consistency of the resonance strongly suggests deliberate acoustic design rather than coincidence. The builders appear to have understood how the density of limestone and the curvature of enclosed spaces could amplify sound. In effect, they transformed the human voice into a physical force capable of interacting with the body and mind. This represents a level of applied acoustic knowledge that challenges conventional views of Neolithic societies as technologically unsophisticated. Local folklore, recorded long before modern archaeology, attributes Malta's megaliths to giants. One well-known legend speaks of a giantess named Sansuna, who supposedly carried the stones of Gigantea from distant quarries while sustaining herself on honey. While such stories are mythological, the recurring global association between megaliths and giants, from Europe to the Andes and the Pacific, may reflect a cultural memory of lost techniques that made monumental stone movement appear superhuman to later generations. Astronomical alignments further deepen the mystery. At Menidra, temple entrances are aligned so that during the spring and autumn equinoxes, sunlight penetrates the structure and illuminates specific interior features. During the solstices, light interacts precisely with the edges of the stonework. Achieving this level of solar precision requires long-term observation, standardized measurement, and generational knowledge transfer. This suggests that Malta's temple builders were not an isolated anomaly, but part of a broader Mediterranean tradition of astronomical and architectural knowledge. Additional intrigue comes from the island's famous cart ruts, parallel grooves carved deeply into the limestone bedrock. Thousands of these tracks crisscross the island, with many continuing off cliff edges and extending underwater. The underwater continuation of these ruts implies they were carved when sea levels were significantly lower, likely during the late Ice Age. This has led some researchers to speculate that Malta was once part of a larger landmass or connected via land bridges, allowing broader cultural exchange before rising seas isolated the island. Malta's geology plays a crucial role in understanding how these feats were possible. Local limestone is relatively soft when freshly quarried, but hardens considerably once exposed to air. This property may explain how intricate carvings were achieved. However, it does not fully account for the near-perfect symmetry maintained across 3 underground levels. Excavation data shows a notable absence of weapons or defensive structures during the temple period. Instead, the archaeological focus is overwhelmingly on art, ritual, architecture, and sound. This peaceful, highly specialized society persisted for over 1,000 years before disappearing around 2500 BC. The cause remains unknown, though environmental stress, ecological collapse, or rising sea levels are considered plausible factors. Among the most evocative artifacts is the Sleeping Lady figurine from the hypogeum, depicting a reclining woman in apparent rest or trance. Some scholars interpret this as evidence that the hypogeum was used for deep meditation, altered states of consciousness, or ritual sleep practices. At Hagarkim, a single standing stone nearly 7 meters long and weighing approximately 57 tons remains upright on an exposed plateau overlooking the sea. Its survival for over 5 millennia in a harsh, wind-battered environment demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of foundation engineering. The stones were not simply placed, but carefully socketed and anchored into the bedrock. Taken together, Malta's temples and the hypogeum reveal a civilization that treated stone and sound as interconnected technologies. The 110 Hz resonance of the hypogeum and the massive stones of Hagarkim stand as enduring evidence that over 5,000 years ago, a society had already mastered physical principles that modern science is only beginning to fully appreciate again. Malta was not a peripheral outpost to prehistory. It was a center of a sophisticated, peaceful tradition that used the earth itself as a medium, bridging architecture, astronomy, acoustics, and human biology into a unified technological vision.
Along the east bank of the Nile at modern Luxor, where the river's annual inundation once regulated agriculture, ritual, and political authority, the Karnak temple complex unfolds not as a single monument, but as an accretion of intention layered across time. Its immense scale does not reveal itself at once. Instead, Karnak is encountered progressively through successive courts, pylons, corridors, and sanctuaries added over nearly 2,000 years. It resists any single moment of comprehension, compelling movement rather than overview, repetition rather than closure, as though the complex were designed not to be finished, but to be entered again and again by successive generations. At its core lies the precinct of Amun-Ra, whose ascent from a local Theban deity to the supreme god of the New Kingdom parallels Karnak's own transformation from a modest Middle Kingdom shrine into the largest religious complex ever constructed. Inscriptions and reliefs attribute major expansions to a long succession of rulers: Senusret I, Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, Seti I, Ramses I, and many others, each adding without erasing, asserting continuity rather than rupture. The impression is unmistakable. Karnak was never completed because it was never intended to be complete. The Great Hypostyle Hall embodies this logic of accumulation in scale. 134 colossal columns rise in dense ranks, some exceeding 20 meters in height, their capitals carved as open papyrus and lotus blooms. The effect is less that of a hall than of a stone marsh, a space where architecture dissolves into ordered repetition. Light enters through clerestory openings, illuminating reliefs that depict ritual offerings and military triumphs, yet the dominant impression is not narrative but structural, an embodied demonstration of permanence, rhythm, and controlled immensity. The sandstone blocks were quarried locally, transported along canals connected to the Nile, and raised through methods that remain only partially understood. Tool marks, unfinished columns, and displaced blocks point to techniques grounded in leverage, coordinated labor, and incremental precision rather than mechanical innovation. What survives is not the process, but its outcome, leaving modern observers to infer systems of knowledge that were once routine but are now archaeologically silent. Karnak's axial alignments reveal sustained attention to celestial cycles. Major processional routes orient toward specific solar events and extend outward through avenues of sphinxes, most notably linking Karnak to Luxor Temple to the south. Together, these sites formed a ritual geography in which architecture, astronomy, and landscape enacted the principle of Mahat, divine order made tangible through spatial arrangement. Here, cosmology was not merely conceptual, but physically traversed. For all its extensive documentation, Karnak raises subtle questions about origins. Its most ambitious constructions appear not as tentative experiments, but as confident executions, implying architectural and ritual knowledge had already reached maturity when applied at this scale. Earlier temples along the Nile suggest a longer developmental lineage, yet many have been dismantled, rebuilt, or erased by later construction, leaving Karnak as the most concentrated surviving expression rather than the point of inception.
The complex also preserves evidence of ideological tension. Hatshepsut's obelisks, later enclosed by male successors, Akhenaten's suppression of Amun followed by swift restoration, and successive modifications that simultaneously honored and overwrote earlier phases, all reveal Karnak as a site of negotiation as much as devotion. Meaning here was not fixed. It was contested, revised, and reasserted in stone. Beneath the visible architecture lies a quieter record of adaptation. Foundations adjusted for floodplain conditions, drainage systems managing groundwater, and the reuse of earlier blocks in later walls attest to pragmatic responses alongside symbolic ambition. Egyptian texts offer unparalleled insight compared to many ancient cultures, yet they remain selective, celebrating divine legitimacy rather than technical procedure, leaving unanswered how architectural expertise was taught, standardized, and transmitted across centuries.
The sheer duration of Karnak's growth implies institutions capable of preserving complex ritual calendars, design principles, and logistical coordination over long spans of time. Yet those institutions survive only through their results. The idea of a lost civilization finds a restrained echo here, not because ancient Egypt is unknown, but because its deepest operational knowledge has thinned to inference. We see what was built, not how decisions were managed or expertise sustained. Karnak's decline was gradual rather than catastrophic. Temples remained active into the Roman period, and parts of the complex were repurposed rather than destroyed. Over time, shifts in religious focus, political centers, and economic priorities reduced its centrality. What had once been a living ritual environment became monumental residue, impressive but increasingly detached from practice. Walking through Karnak today compresses time rather than space. Centuries pass in minutes. Each block participates in multiple historical moments simultaneously. The sense of loss here is not disappearance, but dispersal, continuity masking fragility until meaning thinned beyond recovery. Karnak does not invite radical reinterpretation, it invites patience. In its endless corridors and repeated forms, the complex suggests that human achievement often depends on systems of knowledge assumed rather than explained. When those systems dissolve, what remains can feel excessive, enigmatic, and incomplete. Karnak stands firmly within recorded history, yet its scale and longevity quietly point beyond it, toward depths of institutional memory and cultural coherence once capable of sustaining stone on a scale rarely matched, and whose absence today is felt not as proclaimed mystery, but as a vast, measured silence between the blocks.
In the remote southern reaches of Gornaya Shoria, a mountainous region in Kemerovo Oblast, southern Siberia, lies a formation that has ignited one of the most controversial debates in modern archaeology and geology. High above the taiga forests, massive granite walls rise from the mountain ridges, structures that, if artificial, would surpass every known example of ancient stone construction in terms of sheer block size. Gornaya Shoria has drawn attention because some of its granite blocks appear colossal beyond precedent. While the ancient world already astonishes us with the 800-ton stones of Baalbek or the roughly 1,000-ton monolith known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman in Lebanon, the Siberian formations seem to dwarf them. Certain blocks visible in the walls have been estimated very conservatively and contentiously at well over 2,000 tons, with some speculative estimates reaching even higher. If accurate, such masses would exceed the lifting capacity of most modern cranes, particularly in rugged, inaccessible terrain. The scale alone is not what unsettles researchers. The granite formations rise to heights approaching 40 meters, over 130 feet in places, and are stacked in arrangements that resemble deliberate masonry rather than random collapse. Flat faces, sharp corners approaching right angles, and long horizontal seams extend across ridgelines for hundreds of meters. If these forms were intentionally shaped and placed, they would imply an ability to manipulate mass and precision at a level entirely inconsistent with what is known of human activity in prehistoric Siberia. According to mainstream geology, the formations of Gornaya Shoria are best explained as a natural phenomenon. Granite commonly fractures through a process known as orthogonal jointing, where cooling magma contracts and cracks along vertical and horizontal planes. Over immense spans of time, tectonic uplift, freeze-thaw cycles, and erosion can expose these jointed blocks, creating shapes that appear rectilinear and artificial. From this perspective, the walls are simply exposed bedrock, granite fractured along natural stress planes and sculpted by Siberia's extreme climate. Such processes are well documented elsewhere in the world.
However, critics of the purely natural explanation argue that some features of the site are difficult to reconcile with erosion alone. In several sections, the blocks appear arranged in patterns reminiscent of header and stretcher masonry, a technique used in human construction to improve stability by alternating stone orientation. While nature can fracture rock into rectangular shapes, it rarely produces large-scale interlocking arrangements that mimic structural engineering principles over extended distances. Surface features add another layer of uncertainty. Close inspection of certain granite faces has revealed areas with discoloration, glassy textures, and apparent thermal alteration. These features are not uniform across the site, but appear concentrated in specific sections of the formations. Some researchers have suggested that such textures resemble vitrification or localized exposure to extreme heat, although natural explanations, such as lightning strikes or mineral composition differences, have not been conclusively ruled out. In addition, grooves and channels visible on some blocks show consistent depth and width across multiple surfaces. Whether these are tool marks, weathering artifacts, or the result of tectonic stress remains unresolved. What fuels speculation is the apparent continuity of these features across adjoining stones, as if the surfaces were modified after being positioned together. The isolation of Gornaya Shoria has contributed significantly to the uncertainty surrounding it. Siberia's vastness, harsh climate, and limited accessibility have long restricted large-scale archaeological investigation. During much of the Soviet era, research priorities focused on industry and defense rather than deep prehistoric study, and many anomalous sites received little international attention.
The region is accessible only a few months each year and requires long treks through dense taiga and mountainous terrain. As a result, detailed surveys using modern archaeological methods remain limited. Without systematic excavation at the base of the formations, there is no clear cultural layer, datable organic material, or associated tool assemblage that could firmly establish a human origin. From a logistical standpoint, the challenge is profound. Moving even a single block weighing over 2,000 tons today would require specialized transport systems, reinforced roadways, and precision engineering. Gornaya Shoria offers none of these conditions. The formations sit on uneven ridges with steep gradients and fractured bedrock. Timber rollers, sledges, or rope-based hauling systems would fail almost instantly under such pressure. Accepting a human origin would require rethinking not just construction techniques, but the entire context of ancient human capability in northern Asia. It would suggest the presence of a highly advanced, organized society operating in a region traditionally understood as occupied by small groups of hunter-gatherers during the late Paleolithic and early Holocene. This creates a stark contradiction. Archaeological evidence from Siberia documents Denisovans and early modern humans using stone tools, bone implements, and basic shelters, technologies wholly incompatible with the manipulation of multi-thousand-ton blocks. Between these modest toolkits and the monumental scale of Gornaya Shoria lies a vast technological void. Adding to the mystery are reports of localized magnetic anomalies around portions of the stone formations. Field teams have noted compass disturbances near certain blocks, while adjacent bedrock remains magnetically stable. While magnetite-rich granite can naturally produce such effects, the apparent confinement of anomalies to specific structural zones has prompted speculation about unusual geological processes or intentional material modification. Another intriguing feature is the presence of openings resembling passageways or gateways cut through the stacked stone masses. These openings display vertical sides and horizontal lintels, maintaining geometric consistency with the surrounding formations. Natural erosion is typically chaotic and irregular. It rarely produces large rectangular apertures with flat ceilings embedded within massive stone assemblies. Local indigenous traditions among the shore people speak of ancient giants who once inhabited the mountains and built enormous stone structures.
While such legends cannot be treated as historical evidence, they underscore how long the formations have stood as anomalies within the cultural memory of the region. Ultimately, the controversy surrounding Gornaya Shoria is not driven by symbolism or mythology, but by scale. Archaeology traditionally locates the rise of civilization in fertile river valleys where agriculture, surplus, and population density converge. Gornaya Shoria challenges that framework by presenting monumental stonework in a region that lacks all of those prerequisites. Whether the formations are the result of extraordinary natural processes or the remnants of a lost and undocumented chapter of human ingenuity remains unresolved. What is certain is that the site demands far more rigorous investigation. Only systematic excavation, precise geological analysis, and transparent peer-reviewed study will determine whether Gornaya Shoria is a geologic marvel or evidence that the story of human capability is far less linear than we have been taught. Ellora Caves, cut into the basalt escarpment of the Western Ghats in Maharashtra, Western India. The complex unfolds along a gently curving cliff, its entrances appearing sequentially as if revealed through deliberate movement rather than sudden discovery. From the outset, Ellora resists being understood as a singular act of construction or devotion. Instead, it presents a sequence of layered decisions spanning centuries, beginning around the 6th century CE and continuing into the 10th century, during which Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain communities carved monasteries, temples, and shrines side by side, not in competition, but in an intricate coexistence that feels intentional rather than incidental. The basalt here is dense, unyielding, yet precisely this material allowed builders to carve inward with confidence, producing details that endure with a sharpness rarely preserved in freestanding masonry. Among the 34 principal caves, the most arresting is Cave 16, the Kailasa Temple. This structure immediately reshapes one's understanding of rock-cut architecture. It is not a conventional cave, but a fully realized temple excavated from a single mass of stone. Rather than assembling blocks upward, the artisans removed an estimated 200,000 tons of rock from top to bottom, releasing a complete Dravidian-style temple with halls, shrines, stairways, towers, and sculptural reliefs, all maintaining structural coherence and proportional harmony. The precision of this achievement is remarkable. Every mistake would have been irreversible, yet the form exhibits no sign of hesitation, suggesting the temple existed fully conceived in the mind before the first chisel struck stone. Reliefs depicting episodes from the Ramayana and Mahabharata wrap the walls in continuous narrative, their scale integrated with the architectural rhythm rather than applied as surface decoration, reinforcing the sense that art and structure were conceived as a single system. Elsewhere at Ellora, Buddhist viharas provide contemplative spaces with cells arrayed around central halls, while Jain caves emphasize refined ornamentation and meticulous iconography. Each tradition expresses its values through spatial emphasis rather than contrast. The chronological overlap complicates linear narratives of religious succession, suggesting periods of tolerance, shared patronage, and transmission of technical knowledge that transcend doctrinal boundaries. Inscriptions and stylistic evidence attribute patronage to dynasties including the Rashtrakutas, yet these records reveal little about organization, labor coordination, or knowledge transmission across generations and communities. The techniques themselves imply advanced planning, survey lines etched into rock, proportional systems maintained across massive surfaces, and an understanding of load distribution that kept ceilings stable without support. Tool marks are consistent across centuries, hinting at schools or guilds of craftsmen whose identities remain largely invisible, inferred only through the coherence of their surviving work.
Ellora's position along ancient trade and pilgrimage routes suggests that it functioned not only as a religious hub, but also as a node of exchange where ideas, techniques, and aesthetic conventions circulated alongside goods and people. This circulation may explain the site's hybridity, but it does not fully account for the confidence with which radically different architectural philosophies were executed in the same cliff face. The Kailasa temple, in particular, seems less an experiment than a culmination, drawing upon a reservoir of rock-cut expertise visible in earlier sites such as Ajanta and Badami.
Geological analysis shows that basalt layers were carefully studied, with major cuts oriented to avoid fracture planes, reflecting long practical familiarity with the stone. The scale of excavation implies sustained patronage and social stability over decades, perhaps longer, reinforcing the impression of institutional continuity capable of supporting projects exceeding the lifespan of individual patrons or artisans. Yet, like many monumental complexes, Ellora eventually fell from active use, not through destruction, but through shifting political centers, evolving devotional practices, and redirection of resources. As maintenance ceased, vegetation encroached, and the caves entered a long period of quiet survival. Their interiors remained protected by depth, even as entrances weathered. When rediscovered by later observers, the caves appeared as completed forms, detached from the living systems that created them, inspiring admiration but little understanding of the processes that produced them. The idea of a lost civilization here arises not from uncertainty about the builders, but from the disappearance of the organizational and intellectual frameworks that made such undertakings routine, rather than exceptional. The mastery evident in Ellora feels disproportionate to the fragmentary record of how it was achieved, as though essential knowledge was preserved not in texts, but in practice, apprenticeship, and shared tradition. Ellora challenges assumptions of linear artistic or technological progress. Its most ambitious achievements appear midway through the chronology, followed by works equally refined but differing in emphasis, a pattern suggesting adaptation rather than decline. The eventual cessation of carving leaves the Kailasa temple as a solitary assertion of possibility, unmatched in scale within its medium. Walking through the complex, one notices the absence of scaffolding holes, construction debris, or transitional forms, making the process itself almost invisible and reinforcing the sense that these structures emerged fully realized rather than incrementally. Ellora does not demand speculation. Its cliffs, carved sanctuaries, and silent halls quietly expose the limits of historical reconstruction, reminding us that even in well-documented cultural spheres, the deepest mechanisms of creation can vanish once practice ends. The stone endures, precise and complete, yet awaiting understanding that can never fully catch up to the knowledge once possessed. What survives is not the beginning of the story, but its most durable remainder, a testament to coordination, skill, and institutional memory now preserved in enduring rock.
High on the broken limestone plateaus of southeastern Turkey lies a landscape now known as the Stone Hills, a region that is steadily overturning long-held assumptions about the origins of complex human society. For years, global attention focused almost exclusively on Göbekli Tepe, but ongoing excavations have revealed that it was never an isolated anomaly. Just a short distance away, Karahan Tepe has emerged as an equally, if not more, revealing site, offering deeper insight into a forgotten world at the threshold of the last ice age. Karahan Tepe dates to roughly 9600 to 9000 BC, placing it firmly within the pre-pottery Neolithic period. Rather than being built up from loose stone alone, much of the complex was carved directly into a limestone ridge, creating a vast ritual landscape composed of upright pillars, carved chambers, and subterranean spaces.
The scale and coherence of the site suggest an extraordinary level of planning and social coordination at a time when humanity was still transitioning away from mobile hunter-gatherer lifeways. One of the most arresting features of Karahan Tepe is a sunken rectangular enclosure commonly referred to by archaeologists as Structure AB. Here, the builders did not simply erect stones hauled from elsewhere. Instead, they sculpted 11 upright phallic-shaped pillars directly out of the bedrock, leaving them physically connected to the floor itself. Rising from the western wall of this chamber is a large, naturalistic human head carved in high relief. The face is expressionless yet commanding, with a pronounced nose and full lips, positioned to gaze across the space as if presiding over the rituals below. Light appears to have played an intentional role in the design of this chamber. A narrow opening allows sunlight to penetrate the space at specific times of year, briefly illuminating the carved head. While exact astronomical intent is still debated among researchers, the careful placement of openings and sight lines strongly suggests an awareness of seasonal cycles and solar movement, an impressive achievement for a society that predated formal agriculture or written records. When compared with Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe reveals a distinct artistic and symbolic emphasis. Göbekli Tepe is renowned for its carved animals, snakes, foxes, boars, vultures, rendered in sharp relief across monumental T-shaped pillars. Karahan Tepe, by contrast, is far more focused on the human body and presence. Across the site are more than 250 T-shaped pillars, many integrated directly into walls and floors, with carvings that emerge three-dimensionally from the stone itself. Human figures appear carrying animals, faces emerge from architectural elements, and sculptural forms are woven seamlessly into the fabric of the buildings.
The stone floors throughout the complex are carefully leveled and smoothed, displaying a technical precision that makes the term Stone Age feel profoundly inadequate. This was not a settlement for daily life. There are no hearths, no domestic refuse, no signs of long-term habitation. Karahan Tepe was a purpose-built ceremonial center, one that would have required the coordinated labor of hundreds, if not thousands of people working according to a shared architectural vision. Importantly, Karahan Tepe does not stand alone. It forms part of a broader cultural horizon now known as the Tash Tepeler culture, a regional network of ritual sites spread across southeastern Anatolia. This tradition flourished nearly 6 millennia before the first city-states of Mesopotamia, yet its builders were already reshaping entire hillsides, mastering stone extraction, and organizing labor on a monumental scale. These communities understood circular geometry, load distribution, and leverage long before farming became fully established. The sheer size of Karahan Tepe, covering hundreds of thousands of square feet, implies a structured society with specialized roles. Stoneworkers clearly knew how to read the layers of limestone, peeling them away methodically to leave standing pillars, carved chambers, and sculpted reliefs intact. This was not experimentation, it was the execution of a mature and deeply embedded architectural tradition. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Karahan Tepe lies not only in how it was built, but in how it was deliberately closed. Around 8000 BC, the site was intentionally buried. The chambers were carefully backfilled with clean soil and stone, and flat slabs were placed over openings as if to seal and protect what lay beneath. This was not abandonment through neglect. It was a ritual act of preservation, one that entombed the site for more than 10 millennia. Such deliberate burial suggests that the builders believed the site had fulfilled its purpose, or that a profound transformation in their world demanded its closure. Whether driven by environmental change, shifting belief systems, or the gradual adoption of agriculture, Karahan Tepe was not erased. It was laid to rest. Together, Karahan Tepe and the other Stone Hills sites reveal a chapter of human history far more sophisticated than previously imagined.
Long before cities, kings, or writing, people were already shaping landscapes, embedding meaning into stone, and constructing ritual spaces that linked human identity, cosmic cycles, and the living earth itself.
In the gentle, rolling countryside of County Carlow, Ireland, there stands a monument whose significance lies not in its size or ornamentation, but in the staggering concentration of mass it represents. It is a structure that quietly challenges conventional assumptions about what Neolithic communities were capable of achieving. Unlike sprawling ceremonial landscapes such as Stonehenge or monumental complexes like the pyramids of Egypt, Browneshill Dolmen is a singular, isolated construction. It consists of several upright stones supporting an enormous granite capstone, which today rests at a pronounced angle, one edge touching the ground, the opposite end elevated on stone pillars. At first glance, it appears to be a simple prehistoric tomb, but the physical realities of its construction place it far beyond the realm of casual or primitive stone placement. The defining feature of Browneshill Dolmen is its capstone. Carved from a single block of local granite, it is commonly estimated to weigh between 100 and 120 tons, with some earlier estimates extending as high as 150 tons. Even at the lower end of that range, it is widely regarded as the heaviest megalithic capstone in Europe. To contextualize this mass, it rivals the weight of a fully grown blue whale, or nearly 100 mid-sized automobiles compressed into a single slab of stone. In modern construction, lifting a granite block of this magnitude even a few feet off the ground would require a large mobile crane, reinforced foundations, and precise load calculations. Yet archaeological dating places Browneshill Dolmen around 4000 BC, a time when metal tools were minimal, wheeled transport was not in use, and construction relied almost entirely on organic materials and human coordination. The standard archaeological explanation for how such monuments were erected often centers on the earthen ramp hypothesis. According to this model, the upright stones were first set into prepared pits. A large ramp of compacted soil was then built up to their height, allowing the capstone to be dragged upward using ropes, rollers, and manpower before the ramp was dismantled. While this explanation is theoretically possible, applying basic principles of physics and material science to a load exceeding 100 tons reveals significant challenges. Consider first the rollers. Moving such weight across a soft, damp Irish landscape would require exceptionally dense timber, likely oak, and even then, the pressure concentrated at the points of contact would be extreme. Under that stress, wooden rollers could fracture, compress, or sink into the ground, effectively immobilizing the stone. To counteract this, the ramp's surface would need to be heavily reinforced, either with stone paving or layered timber supports, creating an auxiliary construction effort that rivals the complexity of the monument itself. Then there is the issue of pulling force. Even on a gentle incline of 10 degrees, the amount of force required to move over 100 tons upward is enormous. Neolithic ropes, made from twisted plant fibers or animal hide, had limited tensile strength. To withstand such loads, the rope would need to be extraordinarily thick and carefully distributed. Friction alone would place immense strain on the fibers, increasing the likelihood of catastrophic failure long before the stone began to move. Even assuming the ropes held, estimates suggest that hundreds of individuals, potentially approaching 1,000, would need to pull in precise coordination. Accommodating that many people on a narrow ramp while maintaining synchronized effort presents a logistical problem that is rarely addressed in simplified reconstructions. Archaeological analysis suggests that the capstone was quarried relatively close to its present location, reducing the difficulty of horizontal transport. However, this does nothing to resolve the most challenging aspect of the project: vertical lift and placement.
The stone was not merely dragged into position, it was raised and balanced onto multiple uprights with extraordinary precision.
Distributing such immense weight evenly across 3 or 4 supporting stones requires a keen understanding of balance, center of gravity, and load distribution. Any miscalculation could cause the uprights to tilt, fracture, or collapse entirely. The long-term stability of the structure indicates that these factors were carefully accounted for during construction. Equally striking is what is not found at the site. There is little evidence of massive earthen ramps, extensive worker encampments, or large quantities of discarded construction materials. Browneshill Dolmen often appears as a solitary feature in the landscape, rather than the remnant of a vast construction zone. This absence has led some researchers to consider alternative construction methods. Rather than relying on brute force, the builders may have employed incremental lifting techniques, using levers, wooden cribbing, and step-by-step elevation, raising the stone inches at a time while stabilizing it at each stage. Such a method would require fewer laborers, but a far greater degree of planning, patience, and mechanical understanding. The enduring stability of Browneshill Dolmen is perhaps the strongest argument against the idea that its builders were unsophisticated. The monument has stood for roughly 6 millennia, surviving Ireland's relentless weather, ground movement, and human disturbance. Its foundations were clearly prepared with long-term structural integrity in mind. These were not transient groups stacking stones for short-term use. They were engineers constructing with permanence as a guiding principle. Browneshill Dolmen exists alongside other massive Irish megaliths, such as Prehistoric Dolmen, as part of a broader Neolithic tradition that spans Britain, Brittany, Iberia, and the Mediterranean. Across these regions, we see recurring principles: precise stone placement, mastery of mass, and a shared understanding of leverage and load. This knowledge appears abruptly in the archaeological record, reaches extraordinary levels of achievement, and then gradually gives way to smaller-scale construction methods. Though often overshadowed by more visually dramatic monuments, Browneshill Dolmen represents one of the most extreme expressions of prehistoric engineering. From a purely physical standpoint, it may be more impressive than many larger sites. It demonstrates the upper limits of what can be accomplished using organic materials, human coordination, and a profound understanding of basic mechanical principles. If the capstone truly represents the practical ceiling of Neolithic stone lifting capability, then the builders of County Carlow reached that ceiling 6,000 years ago. They proved that dominance over the environment does not require metal, engines, or electricity, only an intimate knowledge of the lever, the wedge, and the laws of balance. Archaeological investigation of the site continues, though much of the surrounding area remains deliberately unexcavated to preserve the monument. What is clear is that Browneshill Dolmen served as a focal point for its community over generations, a place of burial, ritual, memory, and meaning, standing as silent testimony to a forgotten mastery of stone.